The evening air carried a gentle, fragrant breeze across the tranquil campus of the Preparatory Academy, rustling the leaves of the ancient oak trees that line the stone pathways. Inside the warmth of the administration building, the library stood as a sanctuary of knowledge. George Enright, a man who had weathered many personal storms and emerged with a peaceful, sober clarity, carefully balanced a stack of heavy volumes. "Oh, Janet," George called out, his voice carrying a warm, familiar resonance as he spotted his sister. Janet, the esteemed headmistress of the school, turned and offered a bright, encouraging smile. "Yes, your brother," she replied, her eyes filled with a quiet pride. George approached, a gentle sense of accomplishment in his stride. "Looks very nice." "Oh, I hope so. I found 10 of these medieval histories you wanted. Now, if you need any more, I can get them." Janet looked at the towering stack of books and shook her head with a fond chuckle. "George, those are very heavy, and 10 is fine. But why do you not get one of the boys to help you?" George shook his head, a resolute but cheerful gleam in his eye. "Oh, no. They have their job, and I have mine. I think I have been sober long enough to carry my own weight and 10 medieval histories." Janet felt a swell of affection for her brother. He had fought a hard battle against his dependency on alcohol, and for 8 beautiful months, he had been a beacon of reliability and warmth at the school. "George, thank you. I will put them in the office." "Right," George said, turning his attention to the few students still lingering in the reading room. He clapped his hands lightly together, offering a genial smile. "Ladies and gentlemen, I think we have done about all we can for tonight. And some of you have some midterm exams to study for." The students gathered their belongings, offering polite goodbyes. However, as the room emptied and the quiet settled in, George noticed a shadow moving near the private filing cabinets in the back office. He walked over, his brow furrowing in confusion. "Paul," George said, his voice startling the young man who was hastily trying to close a secure drawer. "What are you doing here?" Paul Thayer, the class vice president and an honor student, jumped, his face pale with sudden panic. "Well, you gave me a scare, Mr. Enright. What are you doing here, Paul?" "Come on out," George said, his tone firm but laced with a teacherly concern. "Come on." Paul stammered, his hands shaking slightly. "Well, I am working student desk this week. I came back because I left a book. I am cramming for exams, so I have got to go." George looked at the cabinet, a sinking realization washing over him. "You open a private file, did you not, Paul? How did you learn the combination?" "I did not take anything," Paul blurted out, desperation creeping into his voice. "All right, Paul." George sighed, feeling a deep sadness for the boy. "I think we better go talk to my sister about this." "I did not take anything, Mr. Enright." "I did not take anything," Paul insisted, stepping backward. In his panic, Paul stumbled. George reached out to steady him, but in the confused tangle of limbs, George lost his footing. He fell backward, his head striking the edge of the heavy wooden desk with a terrible, hollow sound. George collapsed to the floor, motionless. Paul froze, the silence of the room suddenly deafening. Moments later, Charles Lomax, a charismatic but profoundly misguided student, slipped into the room. "Charles," Paul gasped, his voice barely a whisper. "What is the rush?" Charles took in the scene, his calculating mind racing. "You died, did you not?" he murmured, looking at George. "Charles, listen." "George Enright caught me at it," Paul cried, his panic escalating into pure terror. "It is awful. We have got to get help." Charles placed a steadying hand on Paul, though his own motives were far from noble. "Haste makes waste, Paul. Now tell me again, without the emotional embellishment." "I did not mean to." "Tell me, Paul, what is awful?" "I think I killed him." "You think?" Charles replied, attempting to maintain a facade of control. "If you are ever going to be a newspaper man, always make sure of the facts. Come on, back to the scene of the crime. This makes you the first murderer I have ever known." "I am going to call the police," Paul said, reaching frantically for the telephone. "Operator." Charles swiftly disconnected the line. Your mouth is dry, dear boy. The adrenaline is short-circuiting your brain, and you will botch everything. The police, bumbling as they are, will ask questions. What were you doing there, Paul Thayer? And your buddy, your pal, Charles Lomax? What brought him to the headmistress' office? Do you want to tell them all that, Paul? What are we going to do? Paul wept. Hang in there, Paul. You take the head. I will take the feet. Come on, Paul. He will not bite you, Charles instructed, his voice eerily calm as he began to orchestrate a tragically misguided cover-up. They moved George to the edge of a treacherous cliff on the campus grounds. To complete the illusion, Charles produced a bottle of whiskey, splashing it over George to frame the accident as a drunken stumble. Let that be a lesson to you. That is what happens to alcoholics who cannot stay away from their booze. They get into all kinds of terrible accidents, sometimes fatal. The following days were draped in a solemn, respectful mourning. At the local cemetery, under a canopy of weeping willows, a minister delivered a beautiful, comforting eulogy, speaking of light and eternal peace. Janet Enright stood strong, though her heart was broken. As the service concluded, a tall, dignified man with gentle eyes and a reassuring presence approached her. This was Barnaby Jones, a seasoned private investigator from Los Angeles, known for his grandfatherly wisdom and an unyielding dedication to the truth. Barnaby Jones? Janet asked, recognizing the man she had sent for. Yes, Miss Enright, Barnaby said, removing his hat. You have my sympathy, Miss Enright. I did not know if I should come now or wait. I am glad you did, Janet replied softly. I want my brother cleared, whatever it may cost. The police believe he was drinking and stealing school funds. Barnaby nodded thoughtfully. Well, since I was driving through town, I stopped and had a talk with Lieutenant Roth. And did he convince you that George stole that money? Well, let's say he made a good start, Barnaby answered honestly. Mr. Jones, Lieutenant Roth did not know my brother. I would like to tell you about him. This was George. He loved books. When we agreed that I would take control of the school, he insisted on earning his keep, as he put it, by staying on as our librarian. Barnaby observed the genuine love in her eyes. In your statement to the police, you said that your brother gave up drinking about 8 months ago. Yes, as soon as I had officially taken over the school. I assumed that he just no longer needed whiskey as an escape from responsibility, Janet explained, her voice steady but filled with emotion. I do not know how George got to the cliff. I do not know how the whiskey got on him. I do not know how the money from the tennis fund got into his pockets. I only know one thing. My brother did not need to steal. Look at the shelves in his office. All first editions. A set of Longfellow alone is worth thousands. If my brother wanted money for liquor or anything else, he could have sold his books. Was the man who lived here a thief? Barnaby took in the profound truth of her words. A man who cherished books would never steal petty cash while sitting on a literary treasure. I believe you, Miss Enright, Barnaby said warmly. Let's find out what really happened. The investigation led Barnaby into the vibrant, bustling life of the academy. Out on the tennis courts, the sun shone brightly as students engaged in spirited matches. Ron Fannin, a passionate and somewhat hot-tempered tennis coach, was drilling his players, including Charles Lomax and his doubles partner. This is called doubles, Lomax, Ron shouted across the net. Now, in doubles, you let your partner hit the ball when it comes into his side of the court. Okay. Charles rolled his eyes, feigning indifference. Oh, good Lord. Mid-year finals here all next week, and then the scholastic aptitude tests, and then the university stuff. What difference does it make? You're going to flunk them all anyway. Barnaby observed the dynamic from a distance, noting the friction between the coach and the arrogant student. He then made his way to the administration offices, where the air was thick with the anticipation of upcoming exams. He was introduced to Victor Stern, the dedicated college counselor. Mr. Jones, this is our college counselor, Victor Stern, Janet introduced them. How do you do, sir? Victor smiled warmly. How do you do, Mr. Stern? Barnaby replied, his sharp eyes taking in the neatly organized office. Janet explained, as you know, I was not satisfied with the police reports, and so I have asked Mr. Jones to come from Los Angeles to make some further investigations for me. If he needs anything, I know you will give him all the help you can." "Of course, Mr. Jones, anything I can do," Victor offered sincerely. Just then, Paul Thayer walked in, looking incredibly nervous. Victor handed him a stack of papers. "Paul, I will need 50 copies of this college requirement." "Yes, sir. 50 copies right away," Paul stammered, hurrying out of the room. Later that afternoon, Barnaby arranged a casual meeting with Paul and Charles. The boys tried to project an air of confident innocence, but Barnaby, with his grandfatherly charm, knew how to disarm them. "Hello, Mr. Jones. I am Paul Thayer. This is Charles Lomax," Paul introduced them. "How do you do, sir?" Charles added, offering a firm handshake. "Thayer? Lomax. Yeah, I have been reading about you," Barnaby smiled. "You are president of the senior class, editor of the paper, a lot of school activity." "I am from the East, Mr. Jones," Charles said smoothly. "I learned to stuff ballot boxes at my father's knee. Is there anything we can do to help, sir?" "Well, there might be, especially since you are on the paper," Barnaby said, pulling a small object from his pocket. "Any idea how this flashbulb got in the closet near where George fell?" Paul swallowed hard. "I cannot imagine, sir." "Why, Paul, this is the size you use." "You must have dropped it," Charles interjected smoothly, throwing his friend an explanatory lifeline. "Our layout on George Enright, remember? You took 3 or 4 shots up here." Oh, yeah, sure. I guess it is mine. I am always losing them, you know," Paul rambled. Barnaby simply nodded, filing the nervous interaction away in his mind. He knew the boys were hiding something, and he suspected they were trying to frame Ron Fannin. Charles had cleverly planted a button from Fannin's official Wimbledon blazer near the cliff and orchestrated for a check written to the tennis fund to be found half-burned in the coach's fireplace. The local police, led by Lieutenant Roth, quickly fell for the fabricated evidence, arresting the tennis coach. But Barnaby was not a man to be swayed by a neat package of convenient clues. He visited Fannin, listening to the frustrated man's plea of innocence, noting that Janet Enright herself was his alibi during the time of the supposed murder. Returning to the school, Barnaby gently but persistently peeled back the layers of deception. He noticed that a group of students, including Charles and Paul, had miraculously transformed their failing grades into spectacular top marks exactly during the semester they had gained access to the administration building. He approached Victor Stern after the final exams were completed. "How did the boys do?" Barnaby asked. "They aced it," Victor replied, a hint of unease in his voice. 2 98s and a 99. "Very fair test, Mr. Stern." Barnaby knew then that the motive was never money. It was the exam answers. Gathering Paul, Charles, and their friend Willie in the quiet of the campus grounds, Barnaby decided it was time to unravel the truth with a lesson they would never forget. "I thought you would be gone by now, Mr. Jones," Charles said, feigning confidence. "If I am trespassing, I apologize," Barnaby said mildly. "But I wanted to get to the bottom of this." "Get it, the truth is what I said. And I would certainly think you would, too." Barnaby pulled out a piece of paper. "This is a photostatic copy of a check that was found in the fireplace. Numbered 1007, written on the 12th. That is 2 days before Mr. Enright died. I cannot figure how come 3 days later on the 15th you wrote 2 checks. One numbered 1006 and 1005, earlier numbers. Something fishy about the date. You dated it 3 days before you wrote it, did you not, Paul?" Paul trembled, the weight of his guilt finally crushing his resolve. "And this photograph you took of the people at the funeral," Barnaby continued gently. "I made an enlargement. See, all the buttons are on the Wimbledon jacket. How could all the buttons be on the jacket when one of them was supposedly lost 3 days earlier at the cliff? Fannin simply sewed on a new button after the funeral and tore it off days later when the police searched his apartment? Does that seem right, Paul?" Charles tried to intervene, his perfect plan falling to pieces. "He sewed it on badly, I suppose. Look, I really have got to call my family." "Come on, Tell us what really happened, Paul. Barnaby coaxed softly. Paul broke down, tears streaming down his face. Please, Mr. Jones, it was an accident that night. You have got to believe me. I did not mean to kill him. It was an accident. I told Charles we should have called the police. Charles lost his temper, his arrogant facade shattering. Can you not take the pressure? Can you not keep any cool at all? Everything was working perfectly. Everything has worked perfectly for years. Have you ever figured out how to get those examinations? I did. 3 years ago. I broke that combination. You know how? I used my brain. I figured it out. I knew that it would have to be something simple. Something right in front of everyone's nose. Janet Enright's birthday. June 18th, 1932. She is not 38 like she tells everyone. She is 40 years old. Born in 1932. The truth hung in the air, a heavy but necessary revelation. The burden of lies had been lifted. The police were called, not to arrest a cold-blooded murderer, but to process the tragic consequences of a terrible mistake and a foolish attempt to cover it up. Ron Fannin was released, his name fully cleared. Later, as the sun began to set, painting the sky in hopeful hues of gold and pink, Barnaby stood with Janet Enright. Thank heaven he is all right now, Janet said softly, referring to the exonerated coach. I was so anxious to clear my brother that I let myself be blind to everything and everyone. And those boys. Where did I go wrong? Where do we all go wrong? Barnaby offered a kind, understanding smile. You find problems like this in the most unexpected places. It happens in the best of families. Even here, where they have all the advantages. The important thing is that the truth is out. And they will have to learn from this. There is a chance for them to grow into better men because they finally had to face reality. Janet nodded, a sense of profound peace settling over her. George's memory was pristine once more, not as a thief, but as a man who had dedicated his final days to books and honesty. Well, there's a lot to do, Janet said, her voice finding its strength again. Thank you, Mr. Jones. Goodbye, Miss Enright, Barnaby said, tipping his hat one last time before walking away, leaving the school a slightly wiser, ultimately more honest place than he had found it.